Can these 2022 breakouts do it again in 2023? Find out next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5. Today is Monday, January 9th. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Scott White. And let's take a look at some of last year's breakouts. Can they do it again this season? Michael Harris, who finished 56th overall in Roto, the National League Rookie of the Year, 19 home runs, 20 steals in just 114 games. Scott, we do have some issues with the plate discipline, left-handed pitching splits. What do you think about Michael Harris, his likeliness to repeat this season?
Is he going to repeat last season? I think that's a tough one. That's a tough one. And look, I'm taking him late round 2 in 5x5 leagues because, you just pace out his numbers from his rookie season. You get a high batting average, you get power, you get speed, you get 5 category production at an outfield position that's looking weaker than ever. So I certainly want him to repeat it. But yes, the walk rate is low, the ground ball rate very high. 2 things I don't like to see in a hitter. And it makes you wonder if he played over his head for particularly the first 2 or 3 months in the majors. Kind of faded at the end. We didn't see a full season in the majors for him to ride all the ups and downs. Did we just see a really long upswing from him and then things were starting to normalize at the end? I mentioned the ground ball rate. You look at his home run totals in the minors. They weren't that impressive. Now, scouting reports thought he could get better, but with that high of a ground ball rate, is that as likely? So, yeah, I think I think it's reasonable to have questions about Harris, and yet for the upside, you still have to draft him pretty high.
Someone else you have to draft pretty high is Dylan Cease, who was also awesome last year. A 2.20 ERA, a 111 whip, 227 strikeouts, were the 5th most in baseball. One of the best sliders in baseball, really upped the usage last year. Scott, how much do you trust Dylan Cease following up his breakout here in 2023?
So I am even more skeptical of him than Harris. Again, the numbers were... Part of it's just the numbers were so good. It's going to be difficult to repeat that. But in Cease's case, yes, a lot of strikeouts, a lot of strikeout potential. He also led the majors in walks, and that is an easy way for a big bat misser to beat himself by issuing free passes to that degree. That, more specifically in Cease's case, he had a 14-start stretch last year with a 0.66 ERA, which in itself seems unsustainable, right? But during that 14-start stretch, he allowed 10 unearned runs in addition to the 6 earned runs he allowed. So yet another reason for skepticism there. And, ERA in the 220s seems unlikely to happen again, I would say.
Let's go over to a first baseman in Nate Lowe, who hit .302 last year with 27 home runs. Was a little bit unlucky with the counting stats, only 150 runs plus RBI. Scott, how much do you trust Nate Lowe's breakout from last year heading into this season?
Again, I think it's more likely than not that he takes a step back. Specifically, you look at the fact he hit .302. I mean, not many players are capable of hitting 300 or better year after year after year. He had the second highest BABIP, I believe, among qualifiers, and the overall profile suggests 280 is more likely the 300 batting average for Nate Lowe, and maybe 27 home runs is about the full extent of his potential too. That being said, you mentioned the low run and RBI totals. If he has a little bit better luck there, comes closer to 90 in the run and RBI categories than 75, then maybe that cancels out the way he regresses in other areas. So I think Nate Lowe's a perfectly fine starter at first base, long story short.
All right, let's wrap up with one more pitcher here, Kyle Wright from your Atlanta Braves. Scotty, former first-round pick, finally figured it out. He led baseball with 21 wins, the only 20-game winner this past season. Great ground ball rate, really leaned into this curveball, which was fantastic for him, and dramatically improved his control as well. How likely is it that we see this version of Kyle Wright once again?
I think the improvements he made were legitimate. Control was much better. You mentioned the curveball. He threw it more. He threw it harder. It was a better pitch, and it helped him miss more bats. Had an elite ground ball rate. These are all good things for Kyle Wright, and I think those things he can sustain. But he won 21 games. He's the only 20-game winner. There was only one 20-game winner last year too. Even on a great Braves team, it's very unlikely Kyle Wright is going to be the guy who wins 20 games across the majors again. And I mean, he could be exactly the same and win 11 games, 10 fewer. That's just the nature of wins. So, I would expect some ERA regression too, not a ton. I like him at where he's being drafted. He's like about the 40th starting pitcher off the board. I think even factoring in some regression, that's totally fine for Kyle Wright, but it is going to be difficult for him to live up to last year's numbers.
All right. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the Audacy app, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. We'll be back again later on in the week. Bye-bye.